Al Pacino and Diane Keaton once defined Hollywood's most complicated kind of love, the one that blurred the line between art and reality. On screen, they were Michael and Kay, trapped between devotion and duty. Off-screen, their bond seemed to echo the same ache, a closeness so deep it frightened them both. Yet, as decades passed, one question followed Pacino like a shadow. Why did the man who understood love so completely never surrender to it? He watched peers marry, divorce, and marry again, while he drifted through passion and solitude, carrying a mystery that fascinated millions. To some, it looked like fear, to others, control. But behind the myth was a story shaped by obsession, loss, and the impossible demand of living truthfully, both in art and in life. At 85, Pacino finally allowed the truth to surface, and it wasn't the answer anyone expected. For most of his life, Al Pacino stood at the crossroads between intimacy and independence. The women who passed through his orbit never spoke of scandal. They spoke of a man who loved deeply but guarded himself fiercely. His name carried a weight that could fill a room, yet in private, those closest to him saw something gentler, more uncertain, a man trying to understand what love meant beyond performance. When he met Diane Keaton on the set of The Godfather in 1971, it wasn't just the beginning of cinematic history, it was the start of a connection that would defy definition. Their chemistry, raw and unfiltered, spilled beyond the screen. She was whimsical, where he was intense, open where he was watchful. They challenged one another, and in that challenge found something real. But Pacino's devotion to his work often left little room for permanence. Between film sets and sleepless nights spent refining his craft, emotional distance crept in, not from lack of affection, but from the gravity of ambition. Even when their romance faded, their bond never broke. Keaton once described Pacino as the love that stayed with her long after the story ended. And though he never echoed it aloud, his loyalty was visible in the quiet ways he kept her close through the years. They attended premieres together, shared private jokes on red carpets, and defended one another when the press tried to resurrect the ghosts of their past. For both, it was a love remembered, not forgotten. Through the 1980s, Pacino's life unfolded in chapters defined by roles and reflections. He began a long relationship with acting coach Jan Tarrant, with whom he had his first daughter, Julie Marie. Later came Beverly D'Angelo, who gave birth to twins, Anton and Olivia, in the late 1990s. Their relationship lasted nearly a decade, filled with warmth and respect even after it ended. D'Angelo would later say that despite their differences, Pacino remained a devoted father, present in the lives of his children with the same intensity he brought to his art. Then there was Lucila Polak, the Argentine actress with whom Pacino shared a decade-long companionship. Their connection was quiet, sustained not by glamour but by mutual understanding. Yet even that relationship, grounded in affection, never crossed into marriage. To those who knew him best, this pattern wasn't avoidance, it was preservation. Pacino had watched marriages crumble under the pressure of fame, seen love twisted into spectacle, and feared that legal vows might dilute something purer, choice. Each woman revealed a truth about him. He sought connection but recoiled from confinement. He was faithful to feeling, not structure. And through them all, Diane Keaton remained the thread, the reminder of a time when he came closest to surrendering completely. Even as the years piled on, he kept returning to her in interviews, in memory, and perhaps in longing. By the time Pacino entered his 80s, the question had become impossible to ignore. To the world, he was an icon of passion, the gangster with soul, the rebel with poetry in his voice. But to those who knew him, he was simply a man who had learned that love, like art, was never meant to be mastered, only lived, moment by moment, with truth. There are few actors whose lives have mirrored their art so hauntingly as Al Pacino's. Every role seemed to ask the same question he wrestled with off-screen: how much of oneself must be surrendered for love? In The Godfather, he became Michael Corleone, a man whose devotion destroyed him. In Scarface, he embodied ambition unrestrained. In Serpico, he fought corruption at the cost of belonging. Each performance reflected a part of his own paradox, the yearning to connect, and the fear of losing himself once he did. By the late 1970s, Pacino's career had turned into both sanctuary and mirror. The stage and camera offered control, a structure he couldn't always find in relationships. He could step into another life, explore another soul, and then walk away without consequence. That freedom became his substitute for permanence. The rehearsal room replaced the living room. Applause became a kind of affection, fleeting but safe. Colleagues often described him as obsessive, not about fame, but about truth. He was known to rewrite scenes, to question motives, to chase authenticity with near-spiritual focus. Yet this same pursuit made ordinary life complicated. Friends recalled that even during dinner conversations, his mind drifted to dialogue or a half-finished idea. Love required presence, and Pacino, ever the craftsman, was rarely still long enough to give it fully. In 1979, after the acclaim of And Justice for All, he retreated from Hollywood's glare, disillusioned by the weight of celebrity. It was during that time that people closest to him noticed a shift. He began reflecting on what fame had taken: privacy, simplicity, and the chance to live quietly. The press often painted him as brooding or distant, but those who shared his inner circle saw something else: vulnerability. He carried the burden of being understood only through the characters he played. When Pacino returned to film in the mid-80s with Sea of Love, his performances bore a new tenderness, evidence of a man who had learned from heartbreak. The guarded intensity was still there, but so was a quiet melancholy. It was as if, through his characters, he had found a language to say what life had not allowed him to speak. His art became confession, the altar where he laid everything he could not give in love. By the time he entered his 60s, the public fascination with his bachelorhood had turned into a cultural myth. Reporters asked endlessly why he had never married, and Pacino would answer with humor or evasion, but never finality. The truth, as later revealed in interviews, was simple yet profound. He believed that marriage demanded a surrender he had never been ready for. "I have children. I have love," he once reflected indirectly. "But freedom, that's always been my necessity." It wasn't rebellion, it was balance. The discipline that made him one of cinema's greatest also kept him emotionally unanchored. In truth, Pacino's devotion had never been absent. It had simply found its home elsewhere. In his scripts, his students, his long walks through New York City at dawn, where anonymity allowed him to observe, to listen, to exist quietly among strangers. The altar he chose was art itself, demanding, consuming, yet eternally faithful. And perhaps that was his truest marriage, not to any one person, but to a calling that required everything, even the parts of him that longed to belong. As Al Pacino aged, the public's fascination with his solitude only deepened. Every new photograph, a quiet walk through Beverly Hills, a reflective glance at a film festival, sparked renewed curiosity. Had the man who gave the world so many shades of passion ever truly known lasting love? The answer, as always with Pacino, was layered. He had loved profoundly and without permanence, but those connections, fleeting as they appeared, left behind something that endured far longer than vows ever could. His bond with Diane Keaton remained one of the most quietly powerful stories in Hollywood. Long after their romance ended, she continued to speak of him with warmth and awe, describing not a lover lost, but an influence carried through time. Their friendship, delicate, loyal, unshaken by years, reflected a love that had matured into respect. Whenever they crossed paths, the comfort between them was unmistakable. There was no bitterness, only recognition. Two people who had once shared something extraordinary and survived its end with grace. Beyond Keaton, Pacino's devotion found its truest expression in fatherhood. His 3 children became the anchors he never sought in marriage. Julie Marie, his firstborn, often accompanied him to premieres during her youth, while twins Anton and Olivia brought new light to his later years. Pacino spoke through those close to him of how his children changed the shape of his solitude, turning it from isolation into contentment. Friends described how his eyes softened when he spoke of them, how the actor known for fire and fury found peace in their laughter. It was perhaps the purest love story he ever lived. Professionally, Pacino's choices mirrored this evolution. Roles like Scent of a Woman and The Irishman carried undertones of reflection, characters burdened by memory and longing, men coming to terms with what life had demanded of them. In interviews, he often deflected questions about love or regret, but the tenderness threaded through his later performances said more than words ever could. His craft had become autobiography in disguise, an unspoken dialogue between who he was and who he might have been. Even Beverly D'Angelo, his partner through much of the 1990s, spoke not of resentment but admiration. They co-parented with harmony, their shared focus always their children. She once described their relationship as unconventional but filled with care, proof that love could endure without traditional boundaries. This quiet respect between former lovers revealed a truth Pacino seemed to have understood all along. Love does not have to last forever to matter deeply. In his 80s, surrounded by family, friends, and the legacy of half a century of art, Pacino began reflecting more openly. He no longer approached life with the restless energy that once defined him. Instead, there was acceptance, an understanding that his path had not lacked love, only structure. Those who visited him during this time described him as serene, even nostalgic. The man who once feared confinement had learned that connection could take many forms: companionship, mentorship, memory, all of them sacred in their own way. His story became not one of absence, but of transformation. Love had endured, reshaped by time and truth. It existed in laughter shared with old friends, in quiet moments with his children, and in the reverence of audiences who still felt moved by his work. The vow he never spoke became visible through the life he lived, a promise not to one person, but to feeling itself. And perhaps in that, Al Pacino found what many spend their lives searching for, a love that, though never formalized, still outlasted everything else. At 85, Al Pacino finally allowed the truth to emerge from the shadows of myth and speculation. Not with fanfare, not with spectacle, but through quiet reflection, the kind that had always defined him both on and off the screen. For decades, questions about marriage and devotion had followed him like persistent echoes. Why had the man who could convey love so convincingly on film never walked down an aisle? Why had the roles that revealed the depths of his passion never been mirrored in his personal life? The answer, it seemed, had always been there, quietly observable to those who looked beyond the tabloid narrative. Pacino's heart had been fully occupied by art, by his children, and by the rare, intense connections that refused to fit into conventional molds. Diane Keaton remained the most luminous of these memories, a bond that neither time nor distance diminished. Beverly D'Angelo, Jan Tarrant, Lucilla Polak. Each chapter of his life revealed a man who loved with devotion but resisted containment. Marriage for him was never a measure of commitment. It was a structure that might have constrained the very freedom he required to live authentically. Yet he did not withhold love. He cultivated it in ways subtle and enduring. He was a father who never missed a chance to witness milestones, a friend who invested in loyalty over convenience, a mentor who gave aspiring actors a piece of his wisdom without reservation. Each relationship, each bond, each fleeting intimacy was intentional. A deliberate devotion that left impressions far more profound than a signature on a certificate ever could. Pacino's revelation at 85 was not a confession of regret, but a quiet acknowledgement that the life he chose, with its unconventional rhythms and its constant demands, had allowed him to love fully on his own terms. There was no bitterness, no lament for what might have been. only understanding that the essence of love lies not in possession but in presence. Even the women who had once walked beside him, and who had perhaps wished for a different kind of permanence, were part of a tapestry that defined him without diminishing them. In interviews, he hinted at a life lived without compromise to authenticity. He had loved deeply, suffered quietly, and devoted himself to his craft, his children, and his few treasured confidants. His final acknowledgement transformed curiosity into clarity. The bachelorhood that had intrigued the world was not emptiness, but a deliberate choice, a decision to allow affection, loyalty, and creativity to flourish without being boxed by tradition. And for the audience who had followed his career, the revelation added a new dimension to every scene, every line, every nuance. When he held a gaze in The Godfather, it was not only Michael Corleone's power that radiated, but also the man's lived experience of longing, restraint, and devotion. When he carried a scene in Scent of a Woman, the tenderness and complexity reflected not a character alone, but a lifetime of unspoken emotional truths. In the end, Pacino did not simply explain why he never married. He illuminated a life lived with courage, vulnerability, and fidelity to self and others. His love was never absent, it was never quieted. It existed, fully and defiantly, in every bond he nurtured, every child he raised, and every performance he gave. And that is the revelation the world had waited for. The proof that a life unbound by convention can still be rich with love, in ways both visible and unseen. Al Pacino's story reminds us that love cannot always be measured by tradition or ceremony. He never walked down an aisle, yet his devotion has been unmistakable, woven into the lives of his children, the women who shared his path, and the characters who carried his heart onto the screen. At 85, the revelation is not about regret, but understanding that a life lived fully, honestly, and with passion can hold love in its most profound and enduring forms. The bonds he nurtured, the friendships he preserved, and the art he poured himself into are all testaments to a man who loved deliberately, intensely, and on his own terms. For fans who have watched him embody love, loss, and longing across decades, this is the final piece of the puzzle, a glimpse into the man behind the legend. And perhaps the truest legacy of all is that love, even when unconventional, can outlast time, expectation, and even the desire for permanence. For more emotional stories, check out this video.